Hi, friends. I'm Katie.
And I'm Lauren, and welcome to the Okay But Did You Know Pedantic Book Club. Normally, we're a podcast where we talk about the TV and media that we love with a friend who's never seen it before. But once a quarter, we stop and discuss with our book club members on Patreon about a book that has either been adapted into a series or film or is a retelling.
This quarter, our pick was The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, published on September 21st, 1937. And we have just a short synopsis before we get into our discussion. The Hobbit is set in Tolkien's world, Middle Earth. Bilbo Baggins, our hobbit in question, joins a band of dwarves to take back treasure taken from them by the dragon Smaug. Their journey takes them across Middle Earth through the lands of elves, men, and various creatures. Once the dragon Smaug is defeated, armies make their way to the Lonely Mountain to take part in the treasure, leading to the Battle of the Five Armies. Bilbo survives his journey and the war and returns home with a souvenir, the One Ring. Sweet and short because,
Yeah,
but
this is definitely a case of like you could either have a very quick synopsis of your highlight points or you're doing a chapter by chapter summary. There's really no in between.
honestly. And
Yeah.
like with The Hobbit, like of course there are plenty of people that have gone in and really done chapter by chapter
Mm-hmm.
synopsis of this book because this is really Tolkien's like our father of fantasy.
Yeah.
He does a lot. This led to the creation of so many fantasy
Mm-hmm.
worlds that have existed. But just a little bit about it. Some of my favorite little things that I found learning about all of
Mm-hmm.
this, but Tolkien actually recollected it in a 1955 letter to a friend that in the late 1920s, when he was a professor of Anglo-Saxon at Pembroke College, The Hobbit began when he was marking school certificate papers on the back of one which he wrote the words, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," which evolved into the story. Um, that we now know. He did not go any further than that at that time, but following years, he also drew up Thror's map outlining the geography of the tale. So, like the map in the front of our book.
Gotcha.
I thought that was really fun. Um, it original printed number only about 1,500 copies, but sold out by December 15th
Oh, wow.
of that year. And then the American edition was released in about early 1938, and the illustrations within the book he actually drew himself.
Okay.
So that's what I think that's one of the things I love because I have an older edition of The Hobbit with little
Mm-hmm.
illustrations in different chapters.
Yeah, mine has illustrations as well.
Mine didn't the paperback that I annotated does not,
Mm-hmm.
but my other copy that I own, like my collector's copy that I have,
Yeah.
does have little illustrations through it. He drew those.
Oh, wow. I'm trying to find one. Yeah. So,
Let's see
like
which
these.
ones. Yes. It's
There's all
cool,
they're
right?
they're
Like
yeah, that's very cool. They're all
he's
throughout
such
the
a
book.
nerd. I love
Yeah.
it. Obviously.
I mean,
Of
as
course,
as a creator, like if I could make the media for everything I need, I would, but I can't.
right? Like it's so fun too when I make because I make all my little just digital stuff. But so many people are like, "Do you draw?" And I'm like, I wish. There's so many things I would want to be able to draw. I can't draw. I used to as a kid. It was proof. It's just proof that you have to practice
Yeah.
to be good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been adapted many times. There's an animated film. There's of course the movies. There's so many different audiobooks
I
because it's been adapted many times.
I have like mild memories. I think I've seen the animated movie. I think
It's
it
from the
feels like a
70s, 1977.
fever dream, but I feel like I remember specifically the giant spiders.
Uh huh.
Yeah, that
Which
seems
we
familiar.
know how much you love the giant spiders.
That's one thing everyone knows about Lauren is Lauren just loves things with giant insects.
Who doesn't?
It's my favorite thing in the world.
But I didn't want to. I mean, it's Tolkien. It's The Hobbit. I feel like
Yeah.
everyone has a pretty good knowledge, or at least a base knowledge of like, okay, he's this old guy that wrote this book, and then he went into this thing, and it's become what it has. So I didn't put down a ton of notes about it, just
Mm-hmm.
because us and our chaos notes.
Yeah,
In
that's
all
fair.
honesty, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited. I really am excited to know what you think of this because anybody who knows Lauren knows she's a romance reader.
I am.
This is the furthest from your comfort zone.
It really is because like I was thinking before about what I've been trying to broaden my horizons, and I have read some fantasy books this year, and if I pull up I should have pulled up my spreadsheet beforehand. I should have been prepared.
Because I've gotten you to read a couple.
Yes. Well, I read I off the top of my head, Shape of Dragon's Breath.
Oh, love that book.
What other ones? I'm just gonna sort by fantasy real fast.
as Lauren goes into her own spreadsheet.
As I go into my spreadsheet, I have a lot this year. Because I'm smart and don't always put things in the right categories. Go me. Let's try that
I'm so
again.
proud of you.
Well, because I have secondary and main genre, and not everything is
Oh.
labeled correctly. But yeah, but here's the thing: is the main theme. What I can say about a lot of the fantasy that I read this year, because it's like from you, I read To Shape a Dragon's Breath. Another recommendation from you was God Killer by what
Oh.
is their name? By Hannah Kaner.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I've
And to shape a dragon's breath is by Mona Quill Black Goose.
yes.
It's an indigenous author. I love their works so much.
Yeah, the major theme outside the ones that I would say you recommended me, but to be fair, even though still, most of them. Oh, sorry. Also, The Crimson Crown by Heather Walter, A+ book. Need to
I need to
name
read
that
that
one.
one.
Need to name that one by name. The major theme that I see in my fantasy books is there is some level of sapphic romance underneath. It's not usually I don't read romance where like romance is just as much a big a part as the fantasy is,
Mm-hmm.
but they're also usually very gay female books.
This
So
is so not gay. Well, it's
like
kind of gay,
it's
but
gay, but there are no women in this book.
there are no women in this book.
Like there are zero. So like we won't get female elves until the Lord of the Rings. I'm guessing.
Which was actually
So
a change they made in the movies, but we get to discuss that later.
gotcha. Okay then. So that's the running theme of I do read fantasy. I don't only read contemporary romance. I do read other things. This is not in my comfort zone. This is what I'm gonna say right
No.
now. It's not, and I can read outside my comfort zone. Fantasy, I would still say, is still outside my comfort zone, but this might have been a little too far. Is all I'm saying.
You're welcome.
I needed something else to
I
bridge that gap.
I honestly added this one to the wheel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not on us that it was chosen.
No, it is random. For those who
The
don't
wheel
know,
chooses.
we with us and our patrons, we nominate books and we do a wheel of random elimination with like a wheel name picker thing, and it removes books. And when we have one left at random, that's what we read. And we went from Neon Gods by Katie Robert to The Hobbit. We promise there's a theme.
Random, just it's random.
Yeah.
Um, but I got really excited. So I have tried to read these books so much through my childhood, but life chooses what it wants to do. Because I grew up on these,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly the movies.
Yeah.
I have a father who plays EverQuest to this day, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a fantasy online game where you
I figured.
create a character where you get to play a dwarf or an elf
Mm-hmm.
or a human. It's very D&D like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up in the land of nerd. Let's just go with that. And so never being able to like actually sit down and finish the book, because like I'm a mood reader. Even as like a child, I would try to read this and I'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm bored. I'm gonna read something else. So this was partially, I really need to read this and actually finish it for the first time, because I've never actually finished The Lord of the Rings either. It's always a situation of I start it
Mm-hmm.
and then life gets in the way.
Yeah.
And then I pick up a different book because I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can get back into that right now because mood reader strikes and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't go well. So I finally finished
You did. You finished it.
at 30 years old. It took forever.
It did. I feel like I remembered having a copy of this, and I'm sure it's in this house somewhere, because I do remember my dad also trying to read it to me, and I definitely got bored very quickly because the chapters are very long. They're not. It's not a great book, I would say, for nowadays for like a one chapter before bed kind of thing, because like
No.
the longest
Unless you're near the end of the book.
yeah, exactly, like 'cause towards the middle the chapters are like 30-40 pages long, and like I mean the font is big but not that big.
Which one was it? Oh my god, which chapter? Oh, here it is. So, chapter 8.
Is that the
I
spiders
read
one?
through all. I think that's the spiders
Of course,
chapter.
the longest chapter is the spiders one.
And the last, I highlighted the last thing, and the last thing in that chapter is, but that belongs to the next chapter in the beginning of another adventure in which the Hobbit again showed his usefulness. And under that, I just wrote, this chapter was 30 pages long. Like, I also have complaints. Don't worry. Because it's great. I do enjoy it. It's cozy fantasy. It gave me more of an insight to what I grew up on
Mm-hmm.
and more knowledge on what I grew up on, and I really enjoyed that aspect. And now I don't feel like I am, a poser in the fantasy genre. as a
There you go.
fantasy fan and have not read The Hobbit because, so I
So
feel a little bit better about that in myself.
if not having read this makes you a poser, what like classic romance book should I have read to not be a poser in the romance community is now a good question.
Oh, I feel like it's gonna be like one of those like really old Harlequin
Like with like a
romances,
with like a Fabio
like
clinch cover on it.
without fly. What's like the first like mainstream sapphic romance that exists?
I don't know because I really like got back into reading the last couple of years.
Same.
So like by the time it was like on the up. So like when I started reading again, it was Written in the Stars by Alexandra Belfleur was the first one that I found.
So, but no, I guess that's would be for you. It's like a
Yeah.
nice old Harlequin romance.
Well, I'm reading right now Rivals by Jilly Cooper, which is it's not a romance in that it's focused on one romance trope, like one romance
Mm-hmm.
couple, but it's focused on the romantic relationships of a lot of people, and it is from the 80s. It doesn't have a clinch cover, but
There you go.
it just has women's legs in high heels.
I'm okay with this.
It's a great cover.
I have various lines that I did enjoy and
Hmm.
wrote down. I don't know if you did that because
I wrote down my notes and I have my notes separated by chapter that way I didn't lose them
okay.
because
Oh,
unlike
this time you're more organized than
well,
me.
because to be fair, again, but okay, this might be our case of the one who's more organized is the one who has less highlighted.
Honestly, I have a lot highlighted because
Yeah.
nostalgia, fantasy tropes. Because my annotations are quotes. What did I write? Quotes, songs, and riddles because that
Mm-hmm.
is a huge thing
Yep.
in Tolkien or songs and riddles. Favorite moments, just some thoughts, and then world building because I'm actually starting to try and understand Middle Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and there's different ages and there's different things that go on. It's a lot, like a lot. And so since this is like the beginning, I was trying to get a lot of the world building figured out because we just have the map in the front,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like that is not much. These are not much to go off of.
This is sounding more and more like my notes from Neon Gods, where like I had a lot going on with like the politics
Yeah,
of Olympus. I was marking down like the length and like of the spicy scenes and the frequency of them. Like we're really it's really funny to see the disparity and the differences between us in each of these books. I did highlight scenes and I had like notes to add on. And this is the one that I keep telling you from chapter 1. Someone was banging on the door with a stick. Oh no, not a stick. That's the quality of my notes.
I love that. I had the first thing I really highlighted, I think, was being about 50 years old or so and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you. And he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. And I'm like, I still have time for adventure. Bilbo's 50. I
Exactly.
have time.
You're never too late to reach your dreams.
Exactly.
Although even though he doesn't really want to go.
He really doesn't, but I enjoy that the whole time he's just like, I miss my chair and my fire and my hobbit hole. He really is just a grumpy 50-year-old man that's like, I want to go home. What
No,
did I
he
agree to?
well, I wrote that from chapter 4. Why oh why did I ever leave my hobbit hole? The time for complaining is over, my dude.
But then I love that Bomber comes back with, why oh why did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt?
Exactly.
I love Bomber. Because there's really great moments like that throughout the
Mm-hmm.
book that you're reading, and like everyone's snapping at each other, and Gandalf's being Gandalf, and you're just kind of just like, they're all just old men arguing.
That's basically what it is. There are a lot of short old men.
That's pretty much what we got going on here.
Mm-hmm.
I highlighted thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age, and I'm just like, look here. I know I have a problem, but I don't think 30 is too old to love dragons. Just saying.
I'd be tiny, but I'd be mighty. One thing, so I know I knew this from having seen the first Lord of the Rings movie, but the thing with like with hobbits and their various meals that they can have
They
with
like to eat.
they like to eat second breakfast and things like that. So I highlighted tea time had long gone by, and it seemed supper time would soon do the same. Because I didn't realize. I mean, it's because I didn't know these things. I didn't know this was a reference when I'd heard it. But there's a British comedian, Sarah Millican, that there's a bit of hers that I love. That was a reference to this because she was saying that her sister came to visit her for a week, and like afterwards they're talking, and she's like, it isn't until I spent a week with you that I realized how many meals you can have in a day. And it's like she mistakenly thought you had breakfast, brunch, 11's lunch, afternoon tea, proper tea, dinner, supper, 11's, and then a midnight snack that can last anywhere from up to 8 hours.
Which is so funny because hobbits have 7 meals in a day, and you just named even more that this lady had in her joke.
A lot of her comedy is about food.
That makes
Like
sense. 'Cause
I love her comedy style. She's a British comedian. She's very funny, but she's also like very like she would get censored by so many media outlets in the United States.
oh my.
Like she lets the language fly. It's very funny, but she's very open and very like she says the things that you wouldn't expect a woman to say, which is like not good to say that, but like still like she doesn't shy away from the more crass comedy, and she's very funny.
So mm, the Hobbit, 7 meals a day,
Hmm.
breakfast, second breakfast, 11 C's, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, and then supper. I'd be in a coma. That is so much food.
Yeah. Oh,
I mean,
there was one more part after the midnight snack that can last anywhere from up to 8 hours, and then a fucking Twix whenever you like.
oh, I love a good Twix. My husband got into the habit of bringing me a Twix whenever I reached a certain time of the month, and he stopped doing it recently
Mm.
because they changed his route, so there's not a gas station at the end of his route anymore. He like, oh man, what's the word? He conditioned me and then took away my prize, my reward, and I still have not recovered.
He trained you with a Pavlovian response
To Twix,
to Twix. Yeah, it's a good candy
and now
bar.
it's gone. It's such a good candy bar.
One of my favorites.
So they met a lot of creatures through
Yes,
this.
yes, they did. You don't
We
say.
had our trolls, our mountain trolls. We had this, of course, the big spiders, which who doesn't love a giant spider?
It's my favorite thing in the
Um,
world.
wargs, which are kind of like a wolf-looking thing
Yeah, that's what I
that
gathered.
is big enough to ride on.
Uh huh.
They're pretty vicious.
Mm-hmm.
We have, of course, the giant eagles, which are a huge thing in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings lore. I can speak
You're saying a lot of things
because
that sound similar. It's fine.
it's true because a lot of people love to do the whole thing of like with the Lord of the Rings because you understand the premise. They're trying to get the hobbits to Mordor to get rid of the ring,
Yes, I know.
and
I've
so
seen
many
the
people are
first one.
like, why didn't they just ride the eagles to Mordor in the beginning? And it's like because the ring would turn them evil because it's evil. I know
Oh,
you're just like
okay, okay.
why?
But here's the thing: is like not. I'm not gonna call that like because that's not shoddy world building because like that's the thing of like people pull out that thing of like, but what about this one thing that would change the entire story?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, because that's not the story we're telling. Like that
It's not
sometimes that can just be the answer. Like a lot of things, like people, I think I don't remember what the name of there's a name for it. Um, for that, but some because people ask that all the time about like, well, with the Little Mermaid, we can see that she can write her name, so why doesn't she just write in the sand? I'm the one who saved you, kiss me, and like because there'd be no movie.
yeah. There'd be no story to
Like
tell.
there has to be conflict, and sometimes yes, sometimes a very logical thing. You can't take logical real world thinking because if fiction had to stand up to real world logic, you wouldn't have fiction.
Exactly.
So.
I only wrote down a couple of like specifically in my notes. There's a lot in here,
Mm-hmm.
but things that I actually like really make me think more so as well is talking about the dragon. His rage past description, the sort of rage that is only seen when rich folk that have more than they can enjoy suddenly lose something that they have long had. Wow, he was long-winded.
Yes, he was.
Something that they have long had but have never before used or wanted. I was like, that is a very specific type of rage, and
Yep.
and just seeing it gives you a small insight to how he felt about things,
Mm-hmm.
which is really
Yeah.
interesting. Because the last thing that Thorin says before he dies is, "If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world." So it makes me. It's one of those things like it's a children's book, but it
Yeah.
makes you think.
Yeah. You pulled out a lot more thought provoking quotes than I did.
I did. I know. I want to hear yours though
Well, okay.
because I can only imagine.
So one of them that I wrote down was from the flies from chapter 8, and I just next to the title was like flies and spiders. Why? Was no spider has ever liked being called Addercop, and Tom Noddy, of course, is insulting to anybody. And then I wrote because of course that's common knowledge, which means you can tell that I read that chapter likely right after watching the first episode of this season or the second episode of the season of Ghosts, because when they
Mm-hmm.
talk about one character is not abreast to modern technology and says something about like the flames of hellfire or whatever, and the Vikings like actually flames come from this other god, and like he goes this very long thing because everyone knows this, and I'm like, yeah, because that's common knowledge.
which was so funny because during that scene, I'm like, yeah, he's right.
Yeah, that's where the flames come from. And yes, because everybody
Where the flames come from?
everyone knows this. That's fine.
Mudship. That's all I think now. God, this is your fault.
I'm not sorry, honestly.
You're not
Thorfinn's
sorry.
hilarious, but I also back in chapter 5, thief, thief, thief. Baggins, we hates it, we hates it, we hates it forever. Bilbo finally became a burglar.
He did finally become a burglar, and he continues to do so
Yes.
throughout the rest of the book. Because Gandalf, he just knows. Gandalf knows.
Because he's
He knows what
Gandalf.
he's doing.
Which I gotta say,
Exactly.
yeah, because when I read this, I listened to the audiobook as well, which is narrated by Andy Serkis. As we've said, he's
So
phenomenal.
amazing.
Like having him do the narration made the experience so much better, just because he's got. I mean, he's the voice of Gollum already, so like you have that. He definitely knows how to do.
That's covered.
He knows how to do that voice. But so you end up having him more or less doing impressions of his fellow actors, which is kind of funny because I guess until listening to his voice for, in my case, 3.5, 4 hours, however long it took me to read the book, he sounds a lot like Jeremy Irons.
He does, doesn't he?
He really does. Like, if you don't know, Jeremy Irons is the voice of Scar from The Lion King. For anyone else listening, he's got that good, deep, rumbly voice, but he really did sound like Ian McKellen when he was talking as Gandalf.
He does an amazing job, and I really love listening to his voice.
Yeah.
But and of course they did that. They had him narrate because he's in the movie.
Yes.
But there's something about, I listened to a little bit of it, not a ton of it, because life kind of got in the way of this one a little bit again.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, is it the curse of the Hobbit? I start reading this gets chosen in a hurricane.
Like, that's fair.
What's going on? Like, life got in the way, but I finished.
You did it.
And it's just, God, he does such a good job.
He does.
He does such a good
I
job.
saw a video, not while I was reading this. It was just, it came up on my feed before I ever started reading it. I think I'll see if I can find it again and send it to you. But it was him talking about how he does the voices for all the narration. I think it's from the time he was on Colbert, and he was saying, like, for him especially, the voices, he does so much, like, just his body language in the booth, but like his spatial, like, it's where he is relative to the microphone. He'll do something different for each of the characters. So like for Smeagol versus Gollum, when he does like the Lord of the Rings books, is like the same like level but on different sides of the microphone. Like when he does more of like Gimli, he's like all the way down like underneath the microphone, or Gandalf is all the way on top of it because he's very tall. Like it's just interesting, like just to hear him and then do the voices on command because he can. Because he's just a phenomenal voice actor.
Oh, he's so amazing. And I'm excited to see him do more because like he's still going strong.
Oh yeah.
He does so much. I don't know. So I have rants about the movies.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, okay. I don't, because the only other one of my notes that I would say is relative and isn't just a random nonsensical note was in chapter 14, and that was the end of Smaug and Esgaroth, but not of Bard. I said, well, that was a little anticlimactic because they pretty much they introduce a character in a chapter who then kills the dragon at the end of the book. And
like pretty much becomes like the leader of these people.
All in the same chapter.
But on top of that, an entire battle, this huge battle of the 5 armies, is 3 pages long.
Yeah.
So with that, this book is 3 movies long.
Yeah, why?
The first movie is, if you're not watching the extended edition. See, I just finished watching all 3 movies within the past couple of days. Like, I didn't watch them all in one day because I wanted to keep my sanity.
Sounds about right.
It's a long watch. And the first movie is pretty much the beginning. They do a really great job. I really enjoy it. If you haven't listened to even just the snippet of them singing that first song, or like the 2 songs when they're at Bilbo's, they're so much fun. Even if you just watch those scenes, those 2 scenes alone are just a lot of fun because you've got the scene of them like throwing all of Bilbo's stuff around. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
Yep.
And then the other one is just like, there's something about a group of men singing that I just love. And when they're singing about the Misty Mountain and like all the stuff, it's just.
But okay,
I love it. I love it.
It's funny that you say there's something about a group of men singing together. I was watching the last week's episode of The Golden Bachelorette, and I promise I have a point here.
So random.
No, I know, but I promise I have a point. So there's a bit in the house. There's one guy, he liked to write songs because he used to work in the Navy, so he used to like write songs like for his crew, and he was making songs for the guys in the house to all sing, and there was a bit in one of the nights that the men just didn't want to learn the song. They're like, I think this is your song to sing for John. Like, it's not us. Like, they just didn't want to do it. They didn't want to hurt his feelings. So they did the Men Tell All special before the last episode, and they said, like, it's a shame that the song never really got to be performed. So here, and then a group of men walk out, and I just say, I mean, I'm joking, but I'm also certain I'm right. I'm like, is this the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles? Right as they get together, the caption, Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, came out to sing his song. My mom was like, how did you know that? I'm like, when you see a group of men in suits about to sing on TV, it's usually the Gay Men's Chorus of insert city here.
Yeah, honestly. But so we get through that. Of course, Bilbo joining them. We get through the trolls in the first movie. We get through Elrond, so visiting Rivendell's in the first movie.
Okay.
So like the first movie very much is like The Hobbit. It's like you're reading the book.
So
the
first movie is 4 chapters?
Kinda. So and then of course then in the second movie is them. Oh God, where did they leave off from that? Desolation of Smaug. So that's when they're getting like into the mountain, like dealing with Smaug, dealing with the dragon, all that stuff. Like they have to go. That's when they get into like Lake Town and stuff like that. And then of course the third one is the Battle of the Five Armies.
So they take 3 pages and turn it into a 3-hour movie.
The second movie leaves off on Smaug flying to Lake Town.
Okay.
And of course, that's where it picks back up in the beginning of the third movie. And of course, the end of that movie is Bilbo going home. That is the third movie. Literally leading from Smaug, huge battle, Thorin died, Bilbo got back home.
Like, okay, I get from a structural standpoint, those are big act breakers. I get it. That's still not a good enough reason to turn this into 3 movies.
So what they did was they added in. So you know how Gandalf keeps leaving and coming back. So there's a lot of appendices and different things that you find out in other books that what he left to go do. And so right now, what they're doing with the Rings of Power is they're going back to like Galadriel, Gandalf, like with his another name for him is Mithrandir, kind of like at his beginning and the like beginning of Sauron, the big bad in Lord of the Rings, when he was actually like a being and not just an entity, is the best way I can describe that. They're going all the way back to like that in Rings of Power, and so what they deal with, what they call in I guess you could say in the movies of The Hobbit, because it happens kind of simultaneously, kind of not. Is they start going after like these other groups of orcs. They call I think it's the necromancer is supposed to be like Sauron. He's off like talking with Saruman and Elrond. Galadriel is like one of the main characters. She's an elf in Rings of Power and in like Numenor and stuff like that. All trying to figure out like, oh, how do they beat the necromancer? Which is like a whole completely different thing that's actually going on in The Hobbit. So instead of, just kind of just showing what Gandalf's doing a little bit, they decided to combine them. And so in the book, we just have, the Elf King. And in the movie, it's Thranduil, who the actual guy, and he's supposed to be like Legolas's dad. And so Legolas is in it, but then they add this female elf into the second movie, and she falls in love with a dwarf.
Okay, then.
She fell in love. Was it Fili or Keely? One of the brothers. She falls in love with one of them, but as you know, they die.
Yes, they do.
So they packed these movies full of extra stuff that is just kind of like, why?
Yeah,
I get why, because it's Peter Jackson, the same guy who did Lord of the Rings. But the thing is, I enjoyed the Hobbit movies until I read The Hobbit, and I was like, oh no.
And now you're with me of like, how did you make this 3 movies?
I understand the complaints from fans. I still enjoy them. They're still very enjoyable. We finally actually, like, I love that they pulled in more female characters and things like that, so it wasn't just all men.
Yeah, well, because The Hobbit that was more recently those came out. Those came out like in the 2010s, right?
Yes, so The Hobbit, the first one was December 14th, 2012, and then Desolation of Smaug was December 13th, 2013. And then, the last one was December 17th, 2014. So they literally... Well, because I think they kind of did it with the same as Lord of the Rings. When they started filming all 3.
Yeah. Well, because especially with like more modern times, you really can't do something. You can't make a movie without any female characters. Like
You really
there's like
can't.
very few instances where like that won't get torn apart.
Yeah.
So,
So they added a lot,
mm-hmm,
and they of course changed a few things that you're just kind of like, oh, okay. Like instead of him getting his mithril when he finds the sword
mm-hmm,
in the cave troll,
mm-hmm.
Thorin just gives it to him in the mountain. And it's like, my ancestors made it. It's yours now. Um,
Okay.
we don't really see Bilbo name Sting,
Oh, okay.
which is I'm like, but he named him. I didn't know
It
until I read this that he names the sword.
it has a name.
It has a name. His name is Stink. He names it that because of the
Mm-hmm.
spiders. I mean, there are just so many things that you're just kind of like, okay. And then I'm sure you know that Lord of the Rings, they did mostly practical, which
Yes.
was a huge
Mm-hmm.
deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge, huge deal that they did as much practical as they did.
Yep.
I forgot how much CGI was in The Hobbit.
That was one thing that even though I never saw any of the Hobbit movies because that answers one of Brianna's questions of like, do you prefer the book or the movie? I've never seen the movie, so I couldn't tell you. Uh,
Uh,
could not tell you.
I prefer the book
But that's one thing
after all that
that's not
CGI.
because I think I saw I think it was Ian McKellen talking about his experience filming the first
Oh, so
trilogy because he was in scenes with people and second time around rather than just like play with like perception of where the camera is and like different seating and stuff like that. They just opted to have him act opposite a series of tennis balls.
yeah, there is a like behind the scenes video of him sitting at Bilbo's table in his house with no one around him trying to like do his lines, and he like kind of breaks down a little bit because he's not used to doing that, especially in this role.
Yeah, well, because
He's used,
that's something.
which is
Oh, go ahead.
it's just it's really frustrating because Peter Jackson made both.
Yeah, well, because that makes sense because especially like knowing what like Robert Carlyle has said about like the scenes where you're in with scenes with a lot of people, the biggest challenge in being in those scenes is staying present when you're not speaking. But especially if
Hmm.
you have to stay present and not speak against no one, that's got to be even harder.
It's got to be so frustrating. But I mean, the CGI went so far as to like there was a character, and I'm sure they just wanted to use his voice.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was. Let me make sure I have this correct. Dane. So you remember where they used the crows to like call to the
Mm-hmm.
other dwarf
Yep.
army to get them there. Dane is the leader. No, they completely CGI'd Dane. Um, which was weird. Like he looks like pure CGI. It made no sense. Dane Ironfoot,
Mm.
and it honestly just sounded like they really wanted to be able to use the guy's voice, but like full CGI. And I get it
Okay.
because they're writing
Mm-hmm.
Rams for a good portion of it, but there's like literally like him talking to Thorin face to face, and he's still CGI
I hate
because they wanted him to look a certain
I hate
way.
that so much.
And I'm like, can we stop?
Like,
I mean, it was so much CGI. It was so disappointing.
is it because they were trying to film all three movies at the same time? Like at least as like one gigantic shoot, like they felt like they were pressed for time.
I'm not sure why. I need to go back and just see if Peter Jackson has ever spoken on why
Mm-hmm.
they did that. Because returning to Rings of Power, while there is going to be CGI in anything
Yeah.
fantasy, because there's
Yeah.
magic, they have to use CGI for a lot of these things. They went back to quite a bit of practical in Rings of
Mm-hmm.
Power because the original opening scene, like the opening credit scene that they used in promotion for Rings of Power, looks just like using when like people what's it called? My brain. Like with smithing and stuff, when you're using a mold,
Mm-hmm.
but you have the
Yeah.
molten like
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
going through it. Yeah, they did that practical
Wow.
for Rings of Power, which is far more
Mm-hmm.
recent than this.
I think
And when I found that out, I was like, "Oh my god, that's
I want to
amazing."
hope this, but like with Agatha all along, that like companies are seeing the benefits of practically doing these things because they're cheap. Like it's a thing of you can do something well, cheap, or fast. You cannot do all three,
Hmm.
so you got to pick. And like very often, if you're gonna do it well, it's gonna take time. Or if you're gonna do it cheap, it's gonna take time. Like that's you have to decide what's gonna
Yeah.
make more what you're willing to remove. But you really can't do something. You really can't do anything cheap and fast. Actually, no, that's not true. You can't do something cheap and fast, then it won't look good. So it's the case of like,
And it's
and it's
obvious.
obvious, especially when things are CGI, especially when it's bad CGI.
Okay, it says here The Hobbit was a higher budget but stricter
Okay, so
deadlines.
they might have been pressed for time, so that's right. Rather than paying a makeup artist who could do the things they want to do, but it's going to take a little more time and it's going to maybe cost a little bit more. They just didn't have the
Yeah.
space for it.
I just saw someone like also like say as I googled that real quick, they're like that it looks soulless kind of
Mm,
because the visuals are still
yeah.
beautiful. I will say they go back to it's New Zealand where the Hobbit holes still exist to this day, and they still use Bilbo's Hobbit
Mm-hmm.
hole, and like the Shire's really gorgeous. We get Rivendell. Rivendell is still gorgeous. Like they still use a lot of these things that are we still find
Yeah.
beautiful and visually
Mm-hmm.
gorgeous that we love from like Lord of the Rings. But then you just have so much of this that you're just like this. It's not. It doesn't feel
Yeah.
right because if you're going to do something to the extent that you do Lord of the Rings, where so much of it is practical, you can't go into another
Yeah.
like another from this
Mm-hmm.
world and not do the same thing for it because they had a really high budget for
Mm-hmm.
it. There was no reason apart from them just wanting things a certain
Yeah.
way.
That's unfortunate.
Because you can't prove to everybody, hey, we can do this way, but we're not gonna.
Exactly.
But then like the storyline was just weird because I get adding in like a female elf and showing that women are powerful too. I really enjoy her
Mm-hmm.
character, but then it like felt like they were just doing it to be like, okay, an elf and a dwarf are in love. I was like,
that's
what? Where is this
that's
coming
feeling
from?
very reminiscent of Dreamy and Nova.
It is.
That's probably where.
It,
So wait, when did that plot point come into the movie? Like, which movie was it?
um.
Actually, never mind. I both times.
Well, I mean, it's still gonna be like
Yeah,
2012,
I said that. I'm
2013.
like, either way, that's after season. That's after when they would have written it into Once Upon a Time. Never mind.
I'm just saying, it's a little like it is what it
Mm-hmm.
is. But it was a little weird, and the Elf King is still an asshole
Yeah,
in
that's good
this.
because I can't see redeeming him.
There is no, he's not redeemable, honestly. Even in the movie, you're just kind of like, nope, still an asshole because the only reason he sticks around to actually help is because Legolas, who I'm not sure why he was added into the Hobbit movies, other than he is the Elf King's
Is he
son.
still played by Orlando Bloom?
Yeah, but this time they give him really blue contacts,
Gotcha.
which is so jarring
Okay.
because you're just used to seeing him as
Mm-hmm.
him, and then you start watching this, you're like, why are his eyes so blue? Like, don't watch the movies because you're gonna be bored as
Yeah.
hell. But like, I'm just gonna send you scenes
Okay.
after this and just be like, see what I mean?
Yeah, when we were talking about
It's really
when we were
weird.
talking about this yesterday to prep for this, like you said something about like I should watch the first movie. And my response was, "Do I have
Do I
to?"
have to?
That's like I really,
Because
I
there's like,
really didn't want to. Nor did I really have the time because we record this more or less right after I stopped
yeah,
working for the day. So like I really didn't have time.
no, that's fine. I watched all three. And there's, I mean, I still love it.
Mm-hmm.
This is a world that I
Yeah.
love. I find this is very nostalgic for me. I grew up on this
Mm-hmm.
stuff because like there's this really cool scene that's all CGI of like the dwarves setting up like a shield wall, and they're unsure if the elves are going to help them in battle.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, the elves start jumping on their heads over the shield with their
Oh my
swords
god.
to like fight orcs, and it's like really it's fun, but you're also just kind of sitting there like watching elves jump
Well,
over
tell me how you really feel
orcs
about that
heads.
CGI.
Like they do that. And then Dane and all his dwarves show up, and they're all on like really big rams riding
Okay.
around.
Okay.
But the crows don't talk.
You're not selling this movie.
I'm not.
But this does work with.
But I would watch it
No,
again
I
because
know.
I'm a nerd.
It does work with another one of our Patreon questions. So after reading The Hobbit, do you think the movie did well with who they cast? And I would say is Martin Freeman is the one who plays
Yes.
Bilbo. So
Yeah.
knowing him and Ian McKellen, I would say yes, but that's all that comes to mind because
They did a really great job. Oh, I'll have to just
because
okay. I'm gonna bring up WhatsApp specifically for
there you go.
this, just to give you
Gotcha.
visuals. Then,
Because
just to make our life
the
easier.
other part of the question was, did you watch the movie after reading the book for the book club to compare it to the books? If not, then when was the last time you've seen it? My answer is never.
Okay, so you're
Lauren has
gonna
a strained
love
relationship with high
this.
fantasy, guys.
All right, let
If there
me.
aren't hot
How
women,
do
I'm
I?
out.
And that's fine. That's fine. We're okay with
I know my
this.
tastes.
I'm sending you the picture of who they used for Thorin
Okay.
in
Okay.
costume.
I assumed.
Wait, oh my god, I think I
Where are
am.
you sending it?
Am I? No, I'm not. Where are my
Where are you
downloads? Why didn't it download
Where are you
right?
sending it?
I was gonna do it on
Okay.
WhatsApp, but it's being dumb. Because why? Can I just be nice to me? Oh, I can. Sorry, I just learned that I could copy and paste
There you
here. So that's Thorin.
go. Okay, I know that actor.
His name is
It looks so
um
familiar.
Richard Armitage. Is that
Oh, yeah. He was in Ocean's 8.
was he?
Yeah,
See, I know my
he was
stuff.
the ex-boyfriend.
Oh, okay. And then you
Again,
have
it
our
always it comes
lovely
back to media with women.
Feely and Keely.
Okay.
So Keely is the one that falls in love with an elf, and he was in what was it called? It's a UK show that's been um he was like a vampire, a ghost, and something else, but he's in that.
Okay. I can see
I can't remember the name of
based
it.
on the jawline.
Yeah, so he falls in love with an elf. This is such a weird like oh god, I don't even know who else to look up because like those are the main ones you really
Mhm.
let's see. I can just do like a group picture so you can get a
You
visual.
know what? I take back what I said about good casting. Andy Serkis looks nothing like Gollum.
Oh my god. Can I have a group picture of the dwarves,
Oh,
please?
Keely is Aiden Turner.
Thank you. Yes.
He's
I have a lot of
he's the
pictures in
main
front of me.
character on. Oh, he's one of the main characters on Rivals.
Is he?
He's the one. He plays the character who's married to the Victoria Smurfit character.
Oh, so he was in something else too
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But
that I'm trying to remember.
although I will say,
See, we
we're
prepare. We're
so
prepared.
prepared for this. But his character on Rivals, so they're married. Their characters are pretty close in age. He's actually 10 years younger than her, but I think it works really. I think like their chemistry works really well together, despite that, because she's 10 years older than him, which you don't see very often.
You do
Like
not.
it's like with actors at least. Okay,
Being
I feel
human.
better.
Being human.
Oh, I
Being
know what show you're
human.
talking about.
He's in that as well. I sent you just a picture like they use
Mm-hmm.
for The Hobbit, just of everybody. So that's all your dwarves. And I love looking at this picture because you've got Thorin looking all mean
Mm-hmm.
in this, but then you look at the top
Yeah.
and you've got Keely looking all like smoldered.
Yeah. So I stand by what I said about like the jawline of Keely and how I can see someone an elf would fall in love with him because in Rivals he has a very big mustache,
Oh
very
my.
big mustache. It's very funny to look at.
So and you can, I'm sure you can pinpoint who Bomber is in this
Yes, I
picture.
can. That's fairly
But
obvious.
so yeah, that's The Hobbit for
Yeah,
you
and
on casting.
little insight into how prepared we are as we go. Oh, that's who that is.
I'm bad at actors' names. I'm going to fully admit that. I forget who everybody
But it's
is
really funny that I
all
was
the
talking about
time.
Rivals earlier, and it's Aiden Turner. That's really funny.
I love him. He does a really great job,
He's a
but he
phenomenal.
does die in this because Feely and Keely die at the end. And if you're listening to this, that's not a spoiler. You should have read the
The
book
book
before
came out
listening.
87 years ago. You have no excuse. Like
I don't know how to feel about that
there's
statement.
like here's the thing. It's like there's a statute of limitations on spoilers, and I think 87 years is above that or past that because
Yes.
I remember there was a promo thing for Catching Fire, and someone asked
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Lawrence like what one of her favorite like costumes was to wear in that one, and she went like, "Oh, the wedding dress was really cool." And then she went, "Wait, should I not have said that?" There's a book.
There's a book.
Like it's like it's the thing of like she didn't spoil the movie. We knew there was a wedding dress coming. Like I do think a book that came out in the 19
That was the entire promo.
I'm pretty sure a book that came out in the 1930s is past that statute of limitations.
Yeah.
So more questions, which is a fun one. Insight.
And
More questions
yes.
from well let's switch to Sammy because we have a couple more from Brianna.
Okay.
Sammy's, would you consider the Hobbit a cozy read?
Yes.
See, I wouldn't, but that's just because again I don't read as much high fantasy. So like for me, this was a lot higher stakes than other things that I've read.
I mean, cozy is so
It also is,
subjective
yeah.
too. Like for me, little like this journey, a big long journey like
Mm-hmm.
this, where there's trials and tribulations and shit you got to go
Mm-hmm.
through, and maybe fighting a dragon is pretty high stakes.
Yeah.
And a big battle with goblins and orcs and
Many miles with
dwarves and
tricks and
elves.
trials, as one would say.
Yeah, you're okay there.
It was stuck in my head. I had to say it.
but I think the nostalgia for me makes it cozy.
Okay.
Because, like, Aragon's not exactly a cozy read, but I find it a cozy read
Yeah.
because nostalgia.
Like this year with the fantasy that I read, I'll use 2 books as like as a marker. One, neither are epic fantasy, but I would say like on the range of like Can't Spell Treason Without Tea and The Crimson
Oh,
Crown.
that's cozy.
I would say that's very cozy, and The Crimson Crown not so much. I would put this closer to The Crimson Crown, but I wouldn't say it's quite there yet
Okay.
because Crimson Crown is also very dark and emotional. A lot of like death-defying things are happening constantly, so
Okay.
I'd say that's a little more on the less cozy side of things. But I would put it closer to The Crimson Crown than I would put it to Can't Spell
Okay.
Treason Without Tea. Which, by the way, Can't Spell Treason Without Tea is by Rebecca Thorne, and The Crimson Crown is by Heather Walter. If I haven't said that already.
I love I love Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. I need to read the second book. I still
I
haven't.
have the audiobook for it. I got the audio arc from Libro FM.
Tell me how it is because it's pirates,
Yes,
right?
it is.
There's
There
dragons.
are dragons.
Technically.
Yes, there are dragons. I would call that one a dragon book. There are dragons and dragon magic.
That's true. It's on my
Mm-hmm.
list, my big dragon list. That book is on there. I need to read the second one
Mm-hmm.
so I know if there's dragons in the second one.
So another one from Brianna. Which magical race do you think your co-host would be if they were in Middle Earth, or which would would we personally wish to be? I think we would both be hobbits.
I was gonna say, please don't use my height
But like,
against
it's
me.
not a height thing. I think it's just it's how we feel about life in general. I think.
Which is so funny because I
Mm-hmm.
agree, but I've always been obsessed with like wood
Mm-hmm.
elves my whole life. It's what I've always played in
Mm-hmm.
games and everything. So it's so funny that you say that because watching the movies, I've always loved
Mm-hmm.
elves.
Yeah.
Always. Reading the book, those elves are assholes.
No
Like,
desire
so
whatsoever.
I was like, I'm good, I'm good.
Yeah.
Maybe the ones from the movies. Like I wouldn't mind hanging out with Galadriel and
Mm-hmm.
Elrond, but no,
Yeah.
not these guys.
No.
They're
Yeah, they
assholes.
are. So, question specifically for you, what
Oh
okay, so
shit.
it was what are you most excited to talk about regarding the book, as this was your nomination, but since we've talked about the book at this point for the last 48 minutes, what I know this one went by really quickly. Uh
It did. What
I don't
happened?
know. But so I would rephrase that of what was something what were you most excited to talk about that we did get to touch on?
Shitty CGI. Like I love the book. This is something I obviously really enjoy. I love fantasy. I finally finished it.
Mhm.
Please don't judge me, fantasy fans. It just life has a way of making things hard
Mhm.
sometimes. And a fantasy book written into the 1930s is not exactly an easy
No,
read
it's not.
as a teenager,
No.
I will say. It was not easy for me to read as a
Mhm.
teenager. I read everything else under the sun,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, like I think ranting about the movies because we do this. This is what we
Yep.
do. We are very critical of media,
Mhm.
and while I really love the book and I enjoy it and would read it again, the movie now makes me angry. But yet, I'd still watch the movies again because there's still
Mhm.
I still enjoy
Yeah.
them. But we're critical of what we
Yeah,
enjoy.
exactly. And our last question, there was another one in there, but I don't really think it's going to fit in with our conversation. But for me specifically, has reading The Hobbit made me wish to read the rest of the series, which I think goes well into talking about our ratings and how we felt about the book as a whole. I say this with kindness and with love. No. Uh, because this is my thing. So we've said before, high fantasy, this type of high fantasy is very far outside my comfort zone. I think I could get to a point where this is. I've read more stuff like it, maybe from more modern authors. It is a
Mm-hmm.
classic. I'm not gonna. I'm not downing that whatsoever. It birthed a lot of our modern fantasy. I would say a lot of stuff has come. I saw a lot of tropes that I've seen in other things that clearly came or were pulled from this, and like I get a very similar feeling to this that I got from Godkiller. I see why people love it. The world building is robust. The adventure is fun. It's funny. You have the moments of the poems and the riddles and the songs. The audiobook was phenomenal. It's just not for me. And I
That's
think
fine.
that's okay. Not everything is for every reader. So on a 5-star rating scale, I gave it 3 stars because
I'm
I have
surprised. I thought you'd give it like a two.
no, because the thing is, I have a very vibe based system when it comes to rating, and I have like ranges of what things are, and it's a low 3, but it's the vibe of well, I finished it. Like 2 and 1 stars are exclusively for things that I can't finish or I specifically hate read.
Oh, you did not hate
No,
read
I did
this.
not. I did
Thank
not hate
goodness.
read it. I had.
I feel like Andy Serkis probably made
No,
that
I
easier for
think
you, though.
yeah, having the audiobook definitely made it a more enjoyable experience. But like, I also know that like, I mean, I at least I know based off of colloquially what I've been told from other people that my feeling like I get it, but it's just not for me. Isn't a singular experience. I know that's not just mine because a friend of mine I was
Mm-hmm.
telling you works for our local library in the children's department, and they do a battle of the books with the teen patrons. And they always have a classic like children or fantasy book. The classic, I'm guessing children or YA book in the mix. And this year it was The Hobbit, and it was one of the first times that they had such an overwhelming majority of kids that didn't care for the book. So
It's such an old book, I
it's just I
feel.
think yeah it's probably it's a very winding narrator that kind of goes in a lot of different directions. I think people maybe like things to be a little more, and this is not a dig at the book at all. Like
Mm-mm.
it's the book.
It's a product of its
It's a product of
time.
its time. It's a classic. It just wasn't for me. Is at the end of the day, is that's what it is. It's not a book that I'll be clamoring to pick up again.
That's perfectly
Hmm?
fine. Still rated higher than I expected, and I am
Well, now you
happy.
know because I have my vibe system, so it's
Mm-hmm.
vibed at. Well, I finished it.
See, obviously, everybody can see how I feel about
Yeah.
it because this is like my childhood in reading form. Like, I'm not obsessed with dragons
Mm-hmm.
for no
Yeah.
reason. I have an entire dragon, specifically dragon
Mm-hmm.
shelf. And so I had this whole thing of like, how do I have this obsession with dragons? And I haven't read the dragon book, The Hobbit, as we are right now also reading, the Dragon Rider book, like the first ever
Yeah.
one. Is now my book club read for my dragon book club, and I'm like, how have I never read this before? Like it's me. I feel like I'm trying to play catch up
Yeah.
because I love fantasy. Most of my shelves are
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. A good, I want to say 80%
Mm-hmm.
of what I read is
Yeah.
fantasy. Um, and so this is 5 out of 5 for me. This is nostalgia. This is childhood. This is it's 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 cozy for me.
Yeah.
So of course I'm excited. I
Mm-hmm.
nominated it. So I see it very differently, but that's okay because we have very different
Yeah.
childhoods.
We are different
I
people.
needed escape.
We are different people with different life experiences, and we are going to see things in different ways, and that's okay. We don't have to like things that are the same.
I just, I may need have to force you to have a Hobbit day with me one day, but we can add it like a Ren Fair type thing.
That's fair.
It's
I can
okay.
do isn't Hobbit Day just doing nothing and eating food?
Yeah.
That's
Well, so a lot of us would be watching
okay.
Lord of the Rings or something along those
Mm-hmm.
lines as well.
Okay.
Like soon I'll be watching the entire season 2 of Rings of Power with my friend while we have a Hobbit
Okay.
day. So usually you're watching Tolkien, but I don't think I can get you to do
I
that. You'd be so
I'll
bored probably.
I'll pick something else high fantasy that I can do.
We can just have a Hobbit day when the Aragon show comes out. That one's a lot easier, I will
Okay.
say. Not that you've read
I
that.
have
I
not.
won't nominate that for a while. Don't worry.
I appreciate that.
I will. I'm just not going to nominate anything for a
Yeah,
little
well, so
while.
our next nomination is our first one that was nominated by a patron, which is it's just funny how it worked out. We did, I mean, the first one made sense because we were picking the books ourselves, but in fact, out of 3 out of 4 for the first year we've done this, we're our own picks. But our next book,
Okay, but Jurassic Park was top tier.
Jurassic Park, that was a great place to start, quite frankly, because it also helped us figure out what we're doing. But I got so our next book, which we'll say in the outro also, but our next book is going to be Little Thieves by Margaret Owen, which I'm holding up, not that anyone can see that, uh, which was nominated by our patron Erica. Neither of us have read this, which will be interesting because the last one, both of like
Mm-hmm.
one of us had experience with it, but this is a case of when I bought it at a small independent bookstore, which if you are going to read along with us, we recommend if you can buy locally. If you can, we understand accessibility is a thing.
Yep.
But I went to a small bookstore with my friend that I go to every time I visit her, and I brought the book up to pay, and the bookseller was like, "Have you read this?" I went, "No, it's my book club book for this quarter." She's like, "This is my favorite book," and she's like starts telling me about like this one, like there's a third one coming out soon. Apparently, the author does like some interim stuff on AO3, which
Oh
I,
my.
I didn't think
Okay.
you could legally do that, but you know what, it's her world. I'm not saying anything about it, but that alone made me very excited to read this because it is a
But this is a classic
It's
retelling?
yes, it's supposedly it's a YA retelling of the Goose Girl, which is a story that I'm not particularly familiar with.
So the Goose Girl should be public domain.
If it's Grimm Fairy Tales, it is.
If it's Grimm Fairy Tales, it
Okay.
is. So you can actually, if and so I'll be doing
Yeah.
that, so I have an understanding of
Yeah,
the
I
book
will as well.
better. Because they're not that long. Grimm Fairy Tales are
They're
actually
short
not
story.
that
They're short
long.
stories.
So I'll probably read that first and then jump into Little Thieves to have a better
Mhm.
understanding. But that is public domain, so you can Google that and read it online,
Mhm. Yep.
and then purchase Little
Yeah,
Thieves
that'll be yeah.
or borrow from your
Yeah.
library.
We are very pro library here, but yeah, Project Gutenberg is where you're probably going to find that.
Yeah.
So, but we recommend.
So I've never read that one,
Neither have
so
I.
I'm just like I don't remember that one, so I'm like definitely one. And Grimm Fairy Tales, y'all, if you haven't read Grimm Fairy Tales before, they can be a little dark.
Yeah, they're an experience. Well, because fairy tales originally were cautionary tales, like they were bedtime stories, but they were
Mhm.
meant to like tell kids like about stranger danger and like stuff like that. Like just maybe or lying. Don't tell people that your daughter can spin straw into gold and then lock her in a tower for 3 days. Like it's just maybe you don't do that. So
Yeah, because if people read the actual Little Mermaid, I think they'd see that very differently.
yeah, people don't know the amount of people that actually know what happens in that one is disappointing because I love the original Little Mermaid. And that one's Hans Christian Andersen. That one's
Yeah.
not the Grimm brothers, but it's just the fact of it's because it's not just enough for her to have feet. No, she has it. Every step has to feel
Mm-mm.
like knives are boring into her feet, and yet she works through the pain to dance for him, which is just very sweet. But in the end, he genuinely falls in love with somebody else, and she dies.
Like fairy tales are not exactly what Disney has made them
No,
to be.
there is an epilogue that was added on later where she kind of gets reincarnated instead of being of water, being like a daughter of the air, and if she does like good deeds for 1,000 years, she gets a mortal soul. But I kind of like the ending where she just turns into sea foam.
I do
I,
too. I want to be turned into sea foam.
I just want to float along the ocean for the rest of my days.
Just keep me far, far away from the Pacific garbage patch.
Exactly. Thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed the book club episode, and we hope you'll join us next quarter when we read Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. Don't forget to like, rate, and follow the podcast wherever you listen so you can be notified every time we publish a new episode. Follow us at OBDYK_pod on Instagram and TikTok. And if you'd like to join our Patreon, you can find the link with more details in our show notes.
This has been an episode of Okay, But Did You Know? A TV and media podcast. It was hosted by Katie and Lauren and edited by Katie.